Good day to everyone joining us, and welcome to today's X Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled Improve Trial Readiness with Tech-Enabled FSP Delivery Models. My name is Sonia Hunt, and it's my pleasure to be your X Talks moderator for today. Today's webinar is scheduled to run for approximately 60 minutes and will feature a fireside chat with our speakers with limited slides to share. This presentation will also include a Q&A session with our speakers. This webinar is designed to be interactive, and webinars work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit your questions and comments for our speakers throughout this presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. Now, this chat box is located in the control panel, which is found on the right-hand side of your screen. If you require any assistance, please contact me at any time by sending a message using this chat panel. I'd also like to welcome our attendees viewing this presentation from our LinkedIn Live event, and I encourage you to submit questions as well via the comments tab. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. Please note that this event will be recorded and made available for streaming for those who registered on xtalks.com. At this point, I'd like to thank Worldwide Flex, which is a part of Worldwide Clinical Trials, who developed the content for this presentation. Worldwide Flex is trusted functional service provider and resourcing partner for clinical trials. They deliver best-in-class functional outsourcing services to a variety of models. Whether delivering one function or many, a specialized resource, or a tailored team, Worldwide Flex does more than fill a functional need for you. With expertise spanning clinical operations, data management, biostatistics, and programming, safety and medical writing, and their clinical research professionals bring added value at every stage. Now it's my pleasure to introduce and welcome our speakers for today's event. And first, I'd like to introduce you to Craig McInloney. And there he is. He brings 25 years of experience in drug development with small and large CROs to his role with Worldwide. As Senior Vice President of Worldwide Flex, Craig is responsible for the global execution of functional services across multiple therapeutic areas. In his previous roles, Craig has overseen global operations across multiple functions. This has included global expansion across multiple regions, and his leadership experience spans activities in various delivery models, including FSP, full service, and hybrid models. Next, I'd like to introduce you to Stephen Rada, and there he is, Chief Digital and Information Officer with Worldwide Clinical Trials. And Stephen has more than 2 decades of experience driving innovation in healthcare technology and operations. He has been instrumental in driving transformative initiatives that modernize operations and boosted efficiency, including developing a strategic technology roadmap with the clinical team, deploying Gen AI chatbot solutions for customer service, and implementing multi-million-dollar cost-saving measures. And next, I'd like to welcome and introduce Jay Leonard. Hello there. Vice President, Enterprise Technology Transformation and Architecture, Worldwide Clinical Trials. And Jay is a senior technology executive who operates at the intersection of enterprise strategy, business transformation, and technology, ensuring that technology is not only aligned to the business, but actively shaping and accelerating it. Jay helps translate enterprise strategy into actionable technology, data, and operating model direction. He plays a critical role in shaping investment decisions, establishing architecture and portfolio governance frameworks, and enabling executive-level decision-making that connects strategy to measurable business outcomes. Now, with the introductions out of the way, I do have 2 poll questions I'm going to launch first before we get into this fireside chat, and I will launch it now, and you should see it appear on your screen. And here it is. Okay, so this poll question that we have for you is, which is your organization on the tech-enabled FSP journey today? Where is your organization? So this is done in real time. So your participation is strongly encouraged and very much appreciated, because once I close the polls, I'll share the results and then we'll get into the second poll question. So if I can get everyone now to go ahead and launch their answers. You have one choice you can select from. Is it not yet started? Exploring use cases. Running pilots in one or two functions. Embedded across multiple functions. Those are the options you can choose. So please select one. And I'll leave it open for a few more seconds just to encourage everyone to be involved. And we look like we've got mostly everyone. Now I'm going to leave it open for a few more seconds here as I see a little more activity happening. Okay. And I think that is the majority of everyone. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm now going to close the polls and let's take a look at the results. Okay, so in our audience, 45% said not started yet, while 55% said exploring use cases, no one for running pilots in one or two functions or embedded across multiple functions. So saying thank you very much, everyone, for that. So now let's just go to the second poll question, and I'm going to launch that now. And everyone should see that appear on their screen. So this one is, which functional area do you see the biggest opportunity for tech-enabled FSP delivery? So this one here is multiple choice. You can choose as many as you like. So select all that apply. Is it clinical operations, data management, biostatistics, and programming, or is it safety, or finally medical writing? So if I get everyone on board now to go ahead and make their selections, and we'll keep this open for about 45 seconds to encourage everyone to participate. Okay. There we go. Wow. Okay. The bars are moving across. I'll leave it open for a few more seconds, everyone. Okay, I think that should do it. I think that is the majority of our audience. So thank you very much, everyone who participated with that. Much appreciated. Let's close the polls and take a look at the results. Okay, 67% for clinical operations, 67% for data management, 44% for biostatistics and programming. Wow, another 67% for safety, and then 33% for medical writing. So thank you everyone for participating in our poll questions. Truly appreciate it. Now I'm going to pass the mic over to Craig. So Craig, when you're ready, you may begin.
Thanks, Sonia, for such a great introduction. Let me start by first of all saying it's a real privilege to be here today with Stephen and Jay. This is such a great topic. FSPs, they've been around for a long time, but the way that technology fits into them has really shifted dramatically over the last few years, and I would say in particular the last 2 years. There's a lot of pressure on the clinical research industry at all times, but right now there's more pressure than normal to be looking at new ways to do things and effectively be part of a technology revolution that's going on. You know, there's things that we've been aiming to do for a long time that now are possible to do. You know, compress timelines, reduce costs, but still drive the same level of oversight and maintain the quality. And I think that the poll results have shown that many of us are on that journey together, with more than 50% noting that there's some exploration going on there. Working at Worldwide, our Flex team has the very fortunate opportunity to work with many partners across all spheres of functional outsourcings. So the ones that were listed there were just some examples, and it was great to see you all thinking about the opportunities that exist. Today, I'm really seeing that partnership with technology experts as being at the forefront of what's needed for the success. And this is where I'm really fortunate to partner with experts like Stephen and Jay. They bring deep knowledge that really can enable us for the future. So today we want to get some of their thoughts and really help out thinking where technology can actually support in practice, and look at some real illustrations there. So I'm going to dive into that with opening up with an initial question and start right there and think about what's changed in the FSP model that's making technology a bigger lever than it's ever been before, even 2 years ago. And Stephen, if it's all right, I'm going to come to you first on that question.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Craig. I think the interesting change that we've seen, obviously, over the past period of time is that the complexity of trials is continued to grow. And this complexity is pushing us towards a threshold. Maybe we've crossed that threshold where we can't just continue putting more and more people on those trials. We've got to start to depend on technology to support those people, to start to affect the curve. Um, the challenge that we've had in the past was studies are kind of composed of two things from a data perspective. Just plain data like endpoint data coming in, those can be acted on with traditional AI type technologies like machine learning. The other side of the trials is primarily document based, and leveraging traditional models on pure unstructured data has been a huge challenge. That said, in the past 2 years, Gen AI has really come to the forefront. And this has enabled us to start to combine these two capabilities, ML, traditional AI models, with Gen AI to start affecting all aspects of the trial end to end. What we believe and what we've started to see is the combination of these two things in partnership with great people can really lead to an impact on the growth curve of the amount of people needed and the cost needed to drive a trial. Jay?
Yeah, I completely agree, Steve. And I'd probably add to that there's been a real evolution in the actual architecture. If I rewound the clock, coming back a couple years ago, when we talked about exchanging data, what we were talking about is batch files, and batch files dropping into a secure folder on a secure server, and picking it up and running those batch files to keep systems up to date. And it was really disconnected. Today, we're looking at API first connections. It's the first question I ask, for any system provider, what's your APIs? How do we you connect directly into those systems? Another thing that has really surfaced is the use of standards, because there's so much data in a clinical trial. Not being able, or having to data map every element every single trial is simply not scalable. You can't do it in a cost effective manner. But now that we have the APIs, we now have standards. Really, the only thing left is governance, and governance is very manageable. And I think some of the proofs of that is if you look at just the evolution of RFPs. A couple of years ago, sponsors talked about headcount and locations and SOPs. Now they're asking about the data fabric. They're asking about where data lives. They're asking about, how do we validate AI output? So there's been a real shift, as the technology has caught up to really what FSP needs. We're seeing that shift happen, and integrations are becoming less complex, and they're no longer the barrier that they were 2-3 years ago.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, what you're saying there, Jay, about the barriers that we maybe saw a few years ago, and how that's changing. And I get to speak with a lot of different sponsors, right from small biotech through to large pharma. And I think what you're saying really rings true. The changes, that interest in thinking that everyone has now of how can you get that access? How can you get that, direct connections in the way that you're talking about? And Stephen, I like what you were saying there about the combination of the two different approaches. That's really a game changer for us. It's now about, actioning that and making it possible. Because ultimately what the clients that I speak to want, and everyone really wants, is to be able to make quick decisions. And that's about real-time access to data. But it has to be quality data. It has to be the correct data to make the correct decisions. So the ability to work across multiple systems, but in a simpler way, I think that's really exciting at this point in time. Maybe that moves me on to thinking about how FSP, can be a further enabler, as you say, Stephen. got any thoughts on what, tech-enabled FSP would look like? What are sponsors looking to see that might be different from a traditional service provision FSP engagement?
Right. I think we're all used to the traditional CRO to sponsor relationship that was based on PowerPoint slides and outdated dashboards. And I think really what we're looking at as we move forward and we leverage these AI capabilities and these new technology platforms is changing that relationship, getting away from slide decks into things like dashboards that are actually up to date and immediate. You're not having that conversation with your CRO, like where were we? Why is this data wrong? And they say, well, it's not actually wrong. It's, that's from yesterday. We've since corrected it. So everything you were looking at was out of date. If we can get to live dashboards, that we eliminate that discussion. We also get to improvements in transparency. Um, you get immediate access to the data, and it's an unfettered access to that data. So you know what you're seeing is real, and it's the same thing that your CRO is seeing. I think this is possible now because of Gen AI and ML, and that the data can be looked at as it arrives or as it goes into the system. And immediately, those tools can help the humans working in those tools identify areas of interest, areas of things that should be immediately looked at, immediately queried, such that you can, you keep up with that data as it arrives, as well as then those queries, when they're issued from that system, they can be tracked and they can be measured and they can be reported on immediately. I think what this eventually leads to is obviously much better quality in the data that you're looking at, but it also leads to much more predictable outcomes. You know that when the study gets to last patient, last visit, you've got a much more predictable period of time before the study goes into database lock. So I think it's an exciting time. I think it's really going to change the relationship between CRO and sponsor. But we are. It's like I said, it's a great place to be right now.
Jay, what about your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I really love that Steve mentioned dashboards because dashboards demo really really well. Everyone likes a really nice dashboard with trends and things you can drill into in clicks. But the reality is, I can build a dashboard with Claude in about 20 minutes. And what's really important is the data underneath that dashboard. And I think about that in really three layers. I mentioned the integration layer, with the API connections and security that allows us to connect our systems to sponsor systems. Well, there's also this model layer, and that model layer is where the AI kind of works as magic, and AI can you do a lot of the automation and the work. The most important piece of that to me is the governance and the audit layer. That's the piece where you have to capture every action. You have to capture the prompts. You know what the outputs are, the decisions, so that the work is reproducible. And it's that third layer that is so critical to audits. It's so critical to regulators because you've got to be able to demonstrate you're not just putting, cool Java on top of a piece of data. You can actually trace that data back to its lineage. I think about this, the way I tend to think is, yeah, the dashboards are the cool piece, but really the back end really matters more than that front end. That's the piece that the FDA is going to look at. That's the piece that the FDAs are going to want to see, the auditors are going to want to see to make sure you can do that data lineage. I guess the final thing I'd say is, anytime you're talking about these integrations, governance has to be built into the process. That's it. You cannot just bolt something on at the back end and try to recreate the fact that you haven't done a good audit trail, through the course of the study. That governance, that credibility assessment plan, that has to be built in up front, so that the model design, where the training data is coming from, how it performs, and you can predict the outcomes.
as you were both speaking there, it made me think of two things. And the first one was a sponsor audit that we had in the last 2 weeks, where the auditors were looking about where we might go in the future. And one of the key things they noted is, as you think of future audits, whether that be regulatory inspections or it could be client audits coming in, you're probably going to have specialist quality individuals and specialist technology auditors, because everybody wants to know, what you were both saying there about the data being reliable. So we got technology that can be a key lever for us and differentiator if it's reliable and it's being used in the correct way. So it's that combination of processes and validation that's proving it out, and bringing the human in the loop. And I think that was a really interesting perspective from that client auditor that came into it. And the second thing was, I started life many years ago as a statistician. I worked in that role for a number of years. And as a statistician, ICH guidance is very clear. You need to have a statistician involved. And ultimately, the role there is to be able to gather evidence from the data to answer a question. In other words, get information from the data that you can make decisions off the back of. And so having things like dashboards that are really easy to do that, or different tools that can let you navigate around the data to get those decisions, it really changes where we've been following similar approaches for the last 20 years, 25 years. We now get that opportunity to really leverage it. But I think, Jay, as you were saying, it needs to be a structured approach. So I want to get a bit more specific on that, if that's okay. And I'm going to ask where, the question is really, where are we seeing technology adding measurable value in FSPs right now, and ones that we're working on? So maybe I'll start off there, give some examples of what I see from the business end, and then Stephen, you can add to that. We have clients coming to us that in the past have only wanted services. They've either wanted people, if they wanted to hand off work and they just get a delivery back. But it's evolved into flexible approaches. We need to outsource with many different flavors, and that's really what our Flex is about. We can use different processes, different commercial models, we can use people or projects. But now technology comes into that whole construction round about the solution. There is a desire, I think, Jay, you mentioned this earlier, and what we're seeing in RFIs and RFPs, you don't have to go too far in the pages there before you see AI mentioned, and we've got to dive into that. But I don't think anyone has moved fully forward and come out with the solution that, in 2 years' time is exactly where they're going. There's exploration going on. And so we're seeing clients come to us and asking if they could partner with that. So we've got a few clients, right from small biotech up to large pharma, that are really interested in AI-assisted statistical computing programming. The ability to take that unstructured information that you mentioned, Stephen, take that out a protocol or a statistical analysis plan, turn that into something structured based off the standards that Jay was mentioning, allowing us then to accelerate the programming of STTM, Adams, and TLS. So we're moving into proof of concept work in that area. And that's beyond what I think a lot of companies have focused in the last few years, which was statistical computing environments that allowed you to have the correct audit trails and move things around about in a structured way. This is really adding on that AI agent learning capabilities over that. And the result should be, ultimately, you can get to a statistical result hours after a database lock, rather than it being several days. And thinking of databases, we're also looking at how to build EDCs more rapidly. There's opportunities with new technology that's out there to really use AI generation of CRFs that turns into specifications that allows us then to look at reducing, database fill times by 50%, for example. And again, we're moving into discussions there with our partners on that. And then the other thing that I would just add to that is round about the managing of data. I very much have a view that managing of data is not data management as a department's responsibility. It's a whole clinical team's responsibility, and it's that ability to be able to see the data on a continual basis that you can have risk-based monitors, you can have medics, you can have data managers looking at the data, viewing it themselves, and also querying in real time. And we are actively working on studies where we're doing that, and we're seeing 95% reduction in some of that single query time, which is incredibly impressive. But also it's allowing the data to be cleaner on a more current basis than it ever has been before. So that's a few things that operationally we're working on, and obviously we're partnering together, which is really exciting for me. Stephen, what other things have you seen or you want to add to that list I mentioned?
Well, I think, we're starting to really expand our program in the space to leverage technology to accelerate the end-to-end trial. And of course, wherever we do end-to-end, there are opportunities within that are accelerating FSP work. So, and a great example is we've completed a proof of value and now rolled into production a clinical data management solution that has shown tremendous value for how we do data management. It's aggregating all of this endpoint data in a single platform, allows us to drive more common practice throughout that entire function, as well as then accelerating our ability to get to the point where we have clean data. And as an example, with this product in place and the solution in place, and then obviously a trained staff that knows how to leverage it to its max, we're seeing things such as last patient, last visit, as I mentioned before, going to database lock of a reduction of about 20% of the time to go through that process, that closure process. I think the second place that we're seeing similar results. I shouldn't say second. We're seeing similar results in other proof of values, like where we have not yet fully rolled into production, but they're nearing that point. And things like TMF agents to help us file and manage a TMF, agents to help our CREs get ready to go and manage the different sites that they're accountable for. And then on the study build side, how fast can we get from a protocol, ingest a protocol, and then leverage that to set up the EDC for the study? All of those are showing similar results, if not greater savings in terms of time, quality, etc., leading to what looks to be a very promising future around being able to accelerate that entire pipeline.
Yes.
Jane, no, are you going to? I was just going to say, we've been partnering there and together, you and me. So maybe you could elaborate a bit more on that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is interesting to me is when you're thinking about AI is not a magic bullet. It's not. It's not something that's going to provide value unless you're very deliberate about what you want the AI to do. And so one of the things we look at is where we can implement AI inside the same programming environments or the same systems that people are normally operating in. So you're looking at programming the AI already using SAS, using R, operating within that validated execution environment. Again, the role of AI is to suggest. So you take those data management use cases, AI makes the suggestion, the programmer still reviews. There's still that human in the loop, right? The SOPs don't really change because the human decision point doesn't change. Is the human still making the decision to execute the suggestion? What really changes is the time spent on the repeatable activities. I've seen benchmarks that show AI assisted, SD, DTM, and Atom work, dropping 50 to 70%, time on reduction, taking a spec and creating code. with some pretty good accuracy. But again, the human's still in the loop, reviewing those recommendations and deciding how to execute. Steve's right. Our internal pilots, showed similar results. Um, I would also add that we work a lot with vendors, and there's like this 3-point litmus test we always look at when we're talking about a vendor that can produce AI. One, does the model run in an environment that we can control, so that we can ensure that no data is leaking outside of that environment. So we've got the data protections in place. The second, I talked about the regulatory component earlier. So we look at vendors, we make sure that, the vendor, and the AI, can you produce artifacts that a regulator can review? Can you document the prompts? Can you document the outputs? Can you document the model versions? Can you document the decisions that were suggested and were taken? And then the third, is, does it integrate with, open interfaces? Because the last thing we want to do is be locked in to a vendor because we can't integrate, or change vendors because we're locked into a standard that no one else uses. So, you know, you I look at those three aspects and as kind of the key architecture decisions before we ever decide to work with a vendor.
Yeah, I think they're three great things that are at the back of our mind, aren't they? That it's not just about technology; it's about everything round about it and supporting it that's critical for us to be successful. Because ultimately, we're all accountable for that technology. I think though, I mean, some of those results and the areas that we're working on, I hope we don't hear how excited we are about it, because it really is an opportunity that we've been struggling with over a number of years, that we're now seeing some concrete proof and evidence of significant change whilst maintaining that quality and regulatory compliance. I guess one of the things that I hear though is sponsors wonder, how can you get access to that, and how can you maintain that visibility when you move to work in an FSP? Does technology change at all there? Do you need to think differently about that? Jay, let's maybe come to you first.
Yeah, I think visibility goes back to what I was talking about earlier, which is a governance design. Steve mentioned trials, several years ago. It used to be that we ran these 3 tiers. You had the operational team looking, at the study daily. Then you had, the tactical layer that was the programming leads. They were looking at, things weekly or monthly. And then you had your steering committee. Well, what was happening is that, PowerPoint decks were being produced, and the operational team will put together a PowerPoint deck. That'd go to the program team. They'd look at a PowerPoint deck, and then you would go to the steering committee. They're looking at a PowerPoint deck, and the old model had every group basically waiting on the level below them to produce the outputs to analyze. And that just created these gaps and visibility. With more modern interfaces that we talked about earlier, there's a real kind of switch to that visibility, in that all 3 layers are looking at the same data at the same time. What's changed is that it's really the analysis of the data. So the steering committee is looking at the same data with a different lens. And so those KPIs pulled from the data that can be shared across those 3 lenses. And the difference is whether you can act on that signal or not. So I think there's just been with the technology and the change in the data feeds, and we've got faster, more real-time data, it's really shifted that visibility conversation, because you don't, you basically resolve the old issue of, you look at a piece of data and you realize you're looking at something that's a month old. So now you're looking in a rearview mirror. With this shift in the integration, now you can look at predictive, and you can mark, you start heading off problems before they're actually problems.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jay, on that. I think really what we're seeing is, this is an opportunity now where technology is obviously changing that visibility model.
Yeah.
I think that what we're seeing is that in the past, where there was a cautious relationship between CRO and sponsor, we needed to clean up the PowerPoint to make sure that the message was controlled to the sponsor, right? And that took time. And the reason was the data was, we were always behind in the data. We're always behind in analyzing and understanding, and there were always new issues coming in. Now, with AI sitting on top of that data, these issues are flagged much faster, and the technology is at the point where we can respond to those signals much faster. That there's more confidence in the CRO now to just say, hey, take a look and see what we're seeing. And we don't need to clean it up because we're on top of it. I think that changes the conversation between CRO and sponsor, and frankly, and site, in that we no longer need to say, here's our status update that we've managed a very clean and controlled message to. But we're now saying, hey, here in full transparency is what we're seeing. And not only what we're seeing, this is exactly what we're doing about it. It's real time, and we're doing this together.
Yeah, I like the word transparency there, Stephen, because that's what a digitally enabled CRO brings, isn't it? It's that ability to both be looking at the same thing and have the correct discussion round about that. It puts a lot of onus on the CRO to really be doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is what should happen. And it also allows the sponsor to be making the decisions along the way that can sometimes lag behind that the CRO needs. So it's a two-way process, but ultimately it builds trust, I think. It obviously enables the correct discussions to happen, but that trust evolves. And I think that's where we're seeing a lot of our long-term partners focusing is they want to work together in a true partnership going forward. And I think there's also a recognition, not only on what can you get to see data-wise, is that we're all on different journeys. So what we might be looking at, a company that we're working on might be looking at something different. So why not share that knowledge? And we can conquer things together and get to a place where we're really creating a shared ownership. And that's what I'm seeing starting to play out. Obviously, as I think of technology, one of the things that's probably easier is the setting up of that when you've got a new engagement. You have those discussions earlier. So yes, in those long-term partnerships, you can get into the deep discussions, but in a new engagement, you can build something appropriately from the beginning. One of the challenges that I sometimes see from an FSP perspective is how to integrate a truly tech-enabled solution into a portfolio that's already running. You know, is there kind of a path for that? I'm thinking I'll give a couple of examples. We've got clients that are really excited by new ways of working, and then they'll start to look backwards to say, hey, can you bring this into ongoing work? And, talk about previous discussions where we've had that. And we've seen that in a couple of examples. We've had two studies that we took over, rescue studies for data management, where we've seen exactly that. The client was really excited by things that we were doing going forward. And then they said, how do you retrofit that to studies that is ongoing? And should we do that, or should we not do that at all? Any thoughts on that, Stephen?
Yeah, I think it's, obviously going backwards is harder than going forward. New studies, new environments, it's much easier to build from scratch. But I think that it starts with the partnership. We've got to work together and be aligned on, okay, where are we going to focus? What things can we implement in a side-by-side model? And how can we do this in a phased perspective, right? We need to get to the point where we identify those places, we implement the technology side by side with human with the legacy approach. And then once the technology starts to prove its value, start to transition those processes, those legacy side by side processes to the technology enabled processes. That decision of when you cut over needs to be driven by agreed metrics that are established upfront and then measured throughout that process. In the end, what you don't want to do is disrupt the trial. That's the most important thing, is to deliver deliver the end of the trial as fast as possible. But if you can accelerate that by leveraging technology, identify those places, follow that phased side by side process that eventually allows you to start to accelerate that endpoint.
Makes sense. Jay, for your thoughts?
Yeah, I think everything Steve described, works. And the one thing I would add is what really makes it work is standard-based interfaces. Anytime you're talking about a trial running in what I would phrase a mixed architecture, your system A, our system B, your system C, our system D, you've got to make that scale for it to make sense. I always joke, you give me enough time and money, I could build anything. But these solutions have to scale. We've got to be able to repeat it, and you can only do that if you're talking about standards-based architecture. So it becomes less about a conversation of okay, we're going to use your system over here, our system over there, and really a conversation on okay, which standard are we going to use and which interface are we going to use. Once you establish that, now you can scale the architecture. Steve's also right, and I would phrase it. He mentioned phases. You don't want to do this in a big bang approach. Okay, you want to do it in phases. Take it off. Eat the elephant one bite at a time. Take it off in chunks. Do what's right. Put governance in place, make sure data's flowing correctly. You've got things working the way you want them to work. You understand how you're going to classify risk, where the data lives, how the data lineage is going to work, and then you expand. So don't go in and try to just rip everything out at once. Start with the trial. Start with some data flowing, and work your way into that end of state mixed architecture.
It makes a lot of sense. I think the big thing that I would say with the clients we speak to is there isn't one size fits all.
No.
Right? And if you just try to pull something off the shelf in every situation, you're going to fail. The important thing, and certainly what we aim to do, is that you listen first and foremost, spend time together, and you learn what's truly needed, and then you collaborate on a solution that's going to work by sharing the knowledge and sharing some of the pieces. And I think, Stephen, what you were saying there, if you pick particular ones that are going to save you, there may be other technology that we've got that's really not going to help in that situation. Well, don't use it at all. We can pick and choose, certainly in the FSP setting. That's what we see. We're getting towards the end, so I'm going to finish with one final question before handing back to Sonia. If you look at the next 12 to 24 months ahead, what do you think we should all be paying attention to?
So I guess certainly we're going to see significant advancement in AI tooling and models and capabilities in the space. Really, it'll be interesting to see how many of the workflows, regulated workflows, start to be driven by AI, or where AI is supporting those workflows. I think that's it's an evolving space. I'm shocked at how far we've come in 2 years. I also am surprised at how far the regulators are starting to go in this and starting to have perspectives on AI. I think will the regulators get to the point where they're saying, hey, look, we really want you to be leveraging AI and we're expecting human out of the loop in some of these places? I don't know where we'll see that, where ML be the first place for that, where things are more deterministic. Will we start to see that in some probabilistic workflows based on, probabilities that are seen that are probably better than what a human could do? That'll be an interesting place to watch. And then lastly, as you're selecting technology partners or study partners, I should say, it'd be really interesting for you to ask those CROs and other partners, who are they partnered with to deliver on these technologies? Are they partnering with companies that are truly AI forward, or are they working with partners who have not evolved their technology platforms to be more modern in an AI with the AI supported capabilities? I think we've done deep analysis of a lot of vendors in the space, and there are some vendors that just are not keeping pace anymore. And we've also kind of moved away from saying, can we just build this all ourselves? We realized that an effective model is a mix of strong partners who are leveraging their army of development and knowledge in the space, and then layering on places where we can bring some of our expertise and our ability to build on top of that. Going to be a very interesting and fast moving 12 to 24 months. So hard to predict exactly what's going to change, but those are three areas where I think we really should be focused. Jay, did you have anything to add to that? Or?
Yeah, I'm gonna pull up my AI crystal ball and do some predictions. I think a couple things, Steve. Just like we saw this evolution from on-prem to SaaS to platform as a service, I think we're going to see AI start to mature more towards platform solutions. As an example, you know, if you look at it today, we have a lot of study specific solutions, and AI is being built around study to study to study. I think you're going to see some consolidation around these solutions into more of a platform approach, with the differences really supporting the different therapeutic areas, because the data structures, the data, for an oncology study looks different than the data for a CV study, et cetera. So I think you're going to start seeing, the solutions merge, being on a common platform, because that's what drives the economics and scalability, but having the delineations to support different therapeutic areas. One area I'd also look at is, how do the standards evolve? What's the next? What's CDESC version, 2.x? Because that's how you're going to start seeing, real world data coming across, and how we start using these other data sources. Where this lands in 3 years, I think it's FSP is not going to be about butts and seats. It's going to be about FSP is going to be about, people plus a toolbox, and how do we, really enable these people, these individuals to drive the study execution better. Um, a, a, a final thought, I know I'm kind of rambling here. I don't think it's going to be about big budgets. All right. I don't think the organization that wins is going to be the one that spends the most money on AI. I think the organizations that win are going to be the ones who really built in the governance processes, who understand the integration discipline that makes this work, and is the organization who can put AI inside those regulator workflows without breaking them. I think there's where the differentiation is. It's not who can spend $1 billion on large language models. It's who knows how to incorporate them into the regulatory workflows.
Hey, Jay and Stephen, I appreciate you guys. I continue to learn from you every time I speak to you. So thanks for that, and for giving such valuable thoughts and insights for everyone. I think it's such a fast evolving area. I'm definitely excited to be part of it, because it brings such a new opportunity for all the functional outsourcing that we provide from Worldwide Flex, and we're committed to exploration and determining new ways for the future. Where that goes, I think we're all on that path. We're not going to know. exactly now, but the important thing is we're all having the right discussions, the right proof of concepts, moving forward. So I'm excited to see where we end up. That concludes the fireside chat. So I'm going to hand back to you, Sonia.
Well, thank you very much for that very engaging presentation. I am just looking at all the questions that were coming through here. So give me one moment as I join you now for the Q&A portion of the webinar. And as a reminder to our audience, please continue to send in your questions using the questions window if you're watching this via GoToWebinar. And if you're watching this via LinkedIn Live, please feel free to post your questions in the comments section. Okay, so while you were speaking, I did receive a bunch of questions that were coming in. So let me make sure I got them all. I'll try to see if we can get to at least 3 of them today. This question here looks like it's directed to you and Craig and Jay, sorry. And this audience member is asking, what does success look like when a sponsor brings tech-enabled FSP into a study that is already in flight? A great question there. Who'd like to start? Jay?
Yeah, I mentioned this earlier. I think you start small and you start with defined scope. One function, one study. Make sure you have your success measures, measures you defined up front. I'd also say that when you're wiring these data flows, you need to do so without disturbing the validated environments that they're running in. So you can add AI layer in parallel, but again, it's about the human in the loop, about the human reviewing anything before it reaches a regulated artifact. And I'd say measure it honestly. How much time did you save? What's your error rate? How about end user satisfaction? And when those KPIs are green, you expand. If they're not green, you course correct. You make them green, then you talk about expansion.
Yeah, I would add to that, Jay, round about the focus being on the right areas. As you said, it's all about being targeted and looking and saying where can we get the most value. We've seen some interesting things where we've been asked to create visualization, real-time visualization of patient data for new studies that wasn't available with old ones. Some of that's easy to be able to go back and be able to bring in if you have that core standard data there. So if your SDTMs are in the same structure across the studies, you can go back and use that quite straightforward. If you have to go back and think I've got to change my whole data structure, then that creates a whole load of issues and it could potentially put at risk the ongoing study. So it's about sitting down and thinking of all the considerations for that particular topic, working through that as a team and learning the best ways together to go forward. The other thing is you've got to think on the impact of the team. So it's not just about the data. If you've got a team that's working really fluently and then you're bringing something else on at a last minute when you're coming to a database lock, for example, that can be really disruptive to a team who then has to learn a new approach, get trained. In that situation, there's probably not value. If you've got a study that's running for a long period of time where there's not going to be that impact and you get the bigger gain going forward, it makes sense to consider putting it on. So it's just about breaking it into components and having the correct discussion.
Thank you very much for those detailed answers. Let's jump to the next question. I think we have time for 2 more. This audience member is asking, let me find it here. What is the role of the technology vendor in a co-creation model? And how do sponsors avoid getting locked in? Great question. Who would like to start us off with that one?
Why don't you jump in on that one?
Okay, thank you, Steve.
You said who, Steve?
Stephen, you want to start us off?
Oh, you're passing to Jay first, but that's all right. I think that's all right. I think the first thing is, I mentioned this earlier, it's very important, I think, that we identify the right partners that can help us accelerate our technology enablement. We've been very selective looking for partners and vendor partners that are really looking at AI as a key part of their platform going forward, that where they have the right both financial models and, technology models that we're going to be able to bring in, layer and be, act as either the foundation or act as an appropriate layer on top of that foundation to accelerate the trial speeds. And then that partnership needs to also be two-way. We're not just buying the technology. We're also influencing the direction of the technology. They're talking to us about what's working, what's not working, what needs to be improved, and how do we, how much influence will we have on that with them? If we find the right partners, their solutions and our needs will match up very nicely. If we select the wrong partners, it would be, as we go forward, be problematic. I feel very confident that we are on the right path to choosing those right partners.
Yeah, Steve, if I could add to that, I'm gonna kind of focus on the back half of that question, which was, how do you avoid that lock-in?
Yeah.
And this is where I kind of I fall back on the architecture. Is the partner, are they using open interfaces? Because if they're not, it's gonna be very hard to change directions. The second, does that partner allow for key artifacts to be extracted? If you're working with a vendor and their audit log is locked in, you have no way to pull that audit log out. That's going to be very difficult to defend, very difficult to move away from. I've seen vendors where their AI audit logs are all coming in from the exact same user. Well, that's a red flag. The AI is interacting, and there's no evidence of the human in the loop. So, again, that's not a vendor I would look at. I think the third thing is make sure that you are really clear with the vendor. What is your exit clause? That has to be designed up front. If this doesn't work, how do I get my data back? How do I get my audit trails handed over? How do we decommission the models? If I had to provide any advice whatsoever, it would be, if a vendor can't demonstrate those three things, walk away.
Thank you very much for those answers. I think I'm going to squeeze in one more question, and it's for you, Craig. This audience member is asking, how do smaller biotechs without internal AI capability access these benefits through an FSP relationship? It sounds like I've had a heavy loaded question, but can you answer it in 2 minutes?
I certainly try. It's a great question. I think I can put into perspective that we've got a number of clients who don't have the capital to invest themselves. But I think as Jay said, it's not always about having the deepest pockets. It's about having correct partnerships and making the correct decisions along the way. I think one of the things that I've really learned in this space is you need to learn to fail fast. And there's nothing wrong with failing because you learn at the same time. And the next time you move forward with that information. And I think that's one of the benefits that being in an FSP relationship offers, is that there's an opportunity to leverage the partnership with the CRO, with ourselves, and the investment that we're making. You don't have to do that yourself. You can get that real-time benefit, which is why the most exciting things for us are working in true partnerships, where we work that way and we can bring forward our suggestions and really help our clients move forward in the right direction with a tech-to-tech discussion that's going to be relevant from them, that brings that integration, that connectivity that Jay talked about earlier, and then we can build out from that. So I think FSPs work really well when companies don't have that internal AI capability.
Oh, you did it, Craig. Thank you so much for answering that question. We have come to the end of the Q&A portion of the webinar, so thank you to our speakers for answering all your questions. And remember, if we couldn't attend to your questions, and there is a number of them out there, the team will follow up with you after this presentation. Now, if you have any further questions, please direct them to the email address you see there on your screen, marketing@worldwide.com. Thank you, everyone, for participating in today's webinar. You will be receiving a follow-up email from X Talks with access to the recorded archive of this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen. Your participation is appreciated as it will help us to improve our webinars. Additionally, I have shared a link in the chat box there for today's recording. So please go ahead and share that with your colleagues once they register for the recording here as well. And for those of you watching via LinkedIn Live events, we encourage you to visit xtalks.com to register for this event and gain access to such features as viewing the recording and more. And get even more out of today's presentation by downloading the supporting material we have there in the handouts tab. And there's one there called Worldwide Flex Overview. So please go ahead and check that out. Now, please join us in thanking our speakers for their time here today. So thank you very much, Craig, Stephen, and Jay, for that insightful fireside chat. I'm sure everyone enjoyed it. We hope you found this webinar informative. It has been my pleasure to be your webinar moderator. On behalf of the team here at X Talks, we thank you for joining us. I'm Sonia Hunt. Until next time, please take care and bye for now. Bye, everyone. Bye, Craig, Stephen, Jay. Bye.
Thanks, Sonia. Bye.